Joining me today is Erin Clifford, JD. She's a lawyer, and her new book is Wellness Reimagined, a holistic approach to health, happiness, and harmony. For so long, work life balance has been the brass ring to strive for, but have we considered that maybe there's a better goal? Author and wellness coach Erin Clifford invites you to take a break from the chaos of daily life to redefine what wellness truly means to you. Wellness isn't just the absence of illness, it's the presence of a vibrant, harmonious life that nurtures your physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual well being. She shares a holistic, flexible approach that integrates nutrition, exercise, sleep, stress management, mindful living, and intentional self care. You'll learn to create a lifestyle that aligns with your personal values and helps you thrive, not just survive. Instead of rigid routines, you'll explore adaptable habits and realistic goal setting techniques to enhance every part of your life. Erin has a JD from DePaul College of Law and a master's degree in mental health counseling from Northwestern University. Welcome to the show, Erin. Nice to have you on today.
Oh, thanks so much for having me.
All right, so we've been talking about work-life balance probably for what, 2 decades now?
hmm
Yeah, and that's kind of the mantra that everybody talks about. Okay, but you're saying this really isn't what we need. It's not working. We need to take a different approach, a holistic approach, a approach that involves, as I said in the intro, harmony. Is that it?
That's it. I think of kind of that term work-life balance is walking the tightrope. If you think of acrobats at the circus, right? If they just step a little bit or lean to the side, they're going to fall off. And so thinking about work-life balance like that is, it's really terrifying. It makes people overwhelmed and anxious. So I'm really all about harmony. Think of music like harmonizing notes. So how can you take your different life domains and harmonize them in a way that works for you, where you're not just supporting, your physical health, but you're also tapping into that, mental, emotional, and spiritual wellness too.
So how do we do that? I mean, okay, we're going to tap into it, but um, is there a lot of well, you said you work-life balance. It's kind of like, it's sort of either or. It's kind of like sounds like a dichotomy, right? You either fall
Yeah.
off or you're standing up and this is not that. This is a whole lot of things that kind of merge together that create some kind of a harmony. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think about it like this, if I'm working with somebody or if I'm working with a group, thinking about, I always tell people when you start trying to think of, the goals you have for yourself personally, professionally, your lifestyle programs, to really lead with your values. Think about what are your top 5 values or your top priorities in your life and go from there. Because a lot of times, we put, these lives together that don't really support that. And when we do that, we get really out of alignment. I think that's where a lot of people feeling unfulfilled or maybe even experiencing some mental health concerns comes from. So I always tell people, look at the things at this moment in your life that are important to you and figure out, ways to like weave those things together. And sometimes it's simple, if you want to spend more time with your family, you're a busy professional, maybe when you come home at night and you have dinner, everyone just puts their phones away. It's just really having more of that like mindful awareness on an everyday basis of what's really important to you.
All right, you say you come home from work, you value your family. I'm assuming you also value your work too.
Yes.
So what and you let's take work, harmonious and values. Give us an example. Okay, give us another example of like what your values would be in terms of your work life and how do you integrate whatever your values are into a harmonious situation for yourself. Feeling good.
Yeah. So let's say for work, you're like, you know what? One of my values is success, right? I work with a lot of people that they love their jobs, right? And they're building, their businesses but they also value their self-care or their health. And so, but as you, I'm sure know, right? It can be hard for a busy professional sometimes to feel like you can get all of that stuff in. So, kind of finding avenues, to weave that in. I'm a big proponent when it comes to like self-care, for instance, for professionals who are really into their careers of, something is better than nothing. How can you find, time, really kind of setting some boundaries to find time in your day, to eat, have a nutritious meal, get your workout in, even if sometimes we have to, kind of deviate from maybe what we would want to do and just get in more of little pockets of self-care. So maybe I don't have time, for instance, for that hour workout, but you know what? I can still take 10 minutes out of my day and still move, right? So I'm still staying in my routine. And I always tell people too, when it comes to work stuff, there's a lot of research on this. If you just take even a 10-minute break, like I think about it as a pocket of self-care, some of the research calls it snack breaks, you actually can come back and be 30% more productive. So thinking about it, kind of reimagining it, if you will, like that. I've got, yes, I value success and all these opportunities I have in my business, but at the same time, I do value my self-care and my health. So how can I find ways to make this work for me?
Well, I'm sort of I have a kind of a vision as you're talking, like your work, you have a heavy work schedule, you love your work, you're passionate about it, but at the same time, maybe you also enjoy a good meal. And so maybe
Yeah.
at work, you would make sure that you have a good lunch and that you're not just grabbing something or, so that, and you integrate that into the day.
Exactly.
Yeah, because you mentioned snack, but I don't know, I didn't mention this, I don't think, but you're the managing director at Clifford Law Offices. Now, law offices are high, intense
Yes.
stress. Yeah, so let's talk about that specifically, because that's what you do. I mean, lawyers are, people who sometimes work what 40, what I'm going to say 80 hours a week. Maybe that's a slight exaggeration, but many do.
They do. And, when I first, like being a lawyer, I always said I do a lot of wellness with law firms and bar organizations and individual clients. And, being a lawyer is not a 9 to 5 job. It's very stressful, right? And we just are in conflict all day with people. And so, to me, that's like the time you need to make sure you get things in. So a lot of times what I do when I'm working with lawyers is really thinking about how can you get in these like smaller pockets of self-care and just really be more mindful about things. For instance, like if you've got a trial coming up, right? We have a lot of people in my office that are on trial, making sure we've got some healthy food for them. So when they get back to the office at the end of the day, even if that's, we order some prepared meals from a delivery service, that they've got something healthy to eat as opposed to what they were doing before, going next door to the 7-Eleven and just getting a bunch of candy, right? That's
Yeah.
that's not going to support our energy levels and stuff like that. But I really do, I think about it like this, that sort of that idea of the oxygen mask, right? If you get on a plane, the flight attendant tells you, right, you've got to take care of, put your oxygen mask on first before you assist others. And what happens is, especially for attorneys, if you don't take any time for this self-care, this career you're trying to build that a lot of people love is eventually going to burn out because you're going to burn out. So it's really about, strategically finding ways to weave those things in. And, I always tell people, make sure you use, if you've got a really big trial coming up or you're busy with mediation or a busy work period, making sure you use, even if you plan it 6 months later, right? Using some of your vacation time to take a break because, just like when our phone goes on the fritz and we have to just reboot it, right? Turn it off. You've got to do that for yourself too, because it's actually going to make you better at your career as well. Not to mention the fact, a lot of people have families and other things that are really important to them.
Well, the manager, and you are as the managing director, how
Yeah.
does it work in that context for you have many of your attorneys are able to do that, but then
hmm
many aren't, and are they in conflict, with each other?
I think really, I mean, I really try at our firm, to do a lot of wellness initiatives here. And so, kind of what I've, done with people is we bring in lots of like office challenges, overall, I think everyone is very respectful of people taking time off. This was not necessarily always the case, right? I mean, I really, along with, my father and some of, the leaders around here have sort of tried to have a little bit of a cultural shift with these things because I think everybody knows when they, do give themselves a little bit of this like self-care and do spend time with their families, it's better for them. But yeah, every once in a while you get that person who, will come have just been on vacation themselves and comes back and is like, where is this person? And I'm like, okay, everybody's equal here, right? It's good for us as an organization to make sure everyone is taking care of themselves. And, I always have too an open door policy. Like if anyone notices somebody's struggling, I think that's something, we try to assist them with if we can. And, I do a lot of corporate coaching with law firms, and I have noticed it's happening slower than in the corporate space, but I have noticed really a slower cultural shift towards, giving people a little bit, more harmony, if you will. But, at the same time, if you're coming into this profession, it's not the same as, some other, areas where you have more of a 9 to 5 type of schedule. I mean, I don't think that's ever going to be the reality.
Yeah, it's just a different ball game,
Yeah.
a different context. Now you talk about, and you actually are talking about this, the SMART, SMART,
Yes.
specific, measurable, achievable, relevant. This all comes from you, time bound goals. So they're measurable and they're specific and achievable. Achievable is a good word because I think sometimes people get into, especially in professional situations like you're talking about, like lawyers, if you can be an overachiever and
Yes.
they get, you know, upset, stressed out if they feel like they're not achieving enough. So how do you set these kinds of measurable and achievable goals?
Well, when I'm setting a goal with somebody, I first start with, right, we want to get real specific about the goal, but I also want to discover why they really want to achieve this, right? Because, for instance, I'll sometimes get, people that will come and want to work with me where they got a really difficult, challenging health diagnosis. They got diagnosed with diabetes, or maybe they're having some heart issues, and that alone is not enough to motivate people, right? It is maybe initially, but it's like, why do you want to get healthier? What's important to you personally? What's important to you, professionally? If you're an attorney, for instance, and you have career goals, you want to make equity partner at your firm, you also, have a family and you want to be there for your kids and your grandkids, like that's going to help you when you get off track, kind of get back on track. So it's really kind of peeling that onion back and digging deep. And then I'm really into, how are we measuring stuff? If you have stuff and you want it to be achievable, how are you going to track yourself? Do you have an app you're using, or do you have a coach you're using? Do you have a habit tracker? You're just writing stuff down, just kind of knowing you're making little progress along the way. And I'm a big proponent too, when you think about achievable, is really breaking it down. Take something, simple, like, which is not sometimes for people. I want to start an exercise routine, and I'm trying to figure out how to fit that into my schedule. But my goal is I want to do it 3 times a week because I want to get healthy so I can have this amazing career and be there for my family, who I love more than anything. And so you're going to start with the exercise, right? Instead of kind of everything at once. Well, how are we going to make this happen in your schedule, right? Maybe you're going to put it in your calendar. You've got 3 workouts scheduled a week, and you're going to be active in your life. So we're going to put that in our calendar. If something comes up, we're going to move it like any other appointment, and we're going to hold ourselves accountable to this. You're also going to pack your gym clothes the night before, because when you get up in the morning, right, you might not get it going. And then thirdly, you're going to find an accountability partner. So I'm really building out how to achieve this. But one of the things that you have to think about under that achievable is what's going to come up for you. Now, you mentioned like sometimes we don't follow through on things. So I want to know right off the bat, what kind of hurdles do you anticipate? Because we're creatures of habit. A lot of times an individual, myself included, when we want to set sometimes some new goals, we might know, hey, you know what, I'm going to get like busy at work and I'm just going to start blowing this stuff off. Or, maybe my workout's supposed to be after work. If I have a long day, I'd rather just go have a cocktail or, order some carry out, right? So just kind of figuring out what might come up for you off the bat. So when it does happen, it's going to happen. You're able to say, oh, okay, I anticipated that. I'm just going to start again tomorrow, as opposed to being like, man, I'm giving up. I'm not going to even do anything.
And I'm glad you brought that up because those are things, maybe, as you mentioned, you might have some health problems, et cetera, that you didn't expect. What do you do when there's something at home because you value your home, you value
Yes.
your family, and there are some, and I'm going to use the word catastrophic, but some really tough, difficult
Hmm.
issues that happen, whether it can be, you know, illness, kids, divorce. How do you remain harmonious, let's say, in the work situation?
I tell people to just take it one day at a time. I think when we have challenges like in our personal lives, it can become really overwhelming. And so, just thinking about I'm getting myself out of bed in the morning. I'm eating healthy, right? I'm eating, right? Something, right? Sometimes we don't eat when we get stressed out. I'm getting some food in me. I'm drinking my water. I'm trying to go about my day. And, so, not worrying so much about all these like big deal lifestyle stuff, but just those like basic needs. And also relying on your supports in your community. I think a lot of times, especially like people that can be very successful, like in their careers, but then, they have a challenging thing happen at home or in their personal life. It can be difficult sometimes to really kind of ask for help. So really relying on your friends, your family, if you need to, getting some professional supports. But I think one of the things that, is just so important in life, no matter what you do for a living, is thinking about, who's your community. I think as we go through life, we've got to have this community because they're going to help us through these challenging times, and just, kind of putting that one foot in front of the other and being self-compassionate. If you're going through a difficult time, I mean, everyone has experienced it. You've just kind of sometimes got to give yourself grace. Maybe you need to take a little bit of time off. Maybe you're not going to be achieving stuff exactly the way you might want in the workplace, but just, giving yourself like that minute to kind of recover and get through whatever you're going through.
Why do you think people are so reluctant to ask for help? We feel like we're a failure. We feel like we don't want to expose ourselves. We don't want to be vulnerable. And especially, I think that the profession, particularly that we're talking about, let's say attorneys, they handle
Yeah.
things. They help other people get over all their stuff. And so I don't really, there's sometimes that kind of like, well, I don't really need help, but you do need help. And there are different, as you say, different ways to get help, whether it's professional, friends, reaching out. Difficult to do. I think difficult to do in our culture.
It's difficult to do in our culture. I think a lot of people get, there's a lot of shame, I think, for people around not feeling like they can do everything themselves, or, they don't want to, like, if you give an attorney, like, they usually appear very strong, right? They don't want to appear weak. And I also think there's this, in our profession, sometimes people are worried, oh, I'm going to get in trouble. I'm going to lose something. I'm going to get taken off of something. I mean, we have, like, in all of our states, I'm in Illinois, in Chicago, and we've got an awesome lawyer's assistance program, which is completely confidential. And I really try to talk it up when I go into bar organizations because there's a lot of resources there where, no one's going to find out that you use, but everyone has that, oh, I'm afraid. I don't want to look like I can't hack it if I have to ask for this help. So I think sometimes even when I, have somebody come to me that maybe wants to coach, they're a little reluctant initially because they're like, I don't want to feel like I need this extra support, but once you get the extra support, it really does help people. And I think that's like a big message I try to put out is, I think of it as it's brave to ask for help. And so, but that's really a mind shift, I think, for people.
Yeah, and I think, and I assume that you would agree with this, but wouldn't that be something when someone first comes into the firm or any other professional job or
Mhm.
job that's on the agenda from the very beginning? This is what we have to offer, and please take advantage of it if you need it, and not wait until something happens and then they have to, address the problem. But it's there for you,
It
and
is.
yeah.
And I think, but I think that's a newer thing, in a lot of like these organizations. But yeah, I mean, and I would say that to anybody listening who feels like, hey, what, I feel like I'm struggling a little bit with something. If you once you're kind of mindful of it, it's good to get that support right away, because if you wait too long, you might end up, in even a more challenging situation.
Then you can end up in a crisis that's,
Yeah.
yes, much more difficult to handle. One of the things, and this is something that I think in all aspects of one's life you need to do, setting boundaries. And you
Yes.
talk about that, your time, technology, social, emotional, all of those. So let's talk about that, because setting boundaries, if you have clear boundaries, um, and you're able to follow them and are aware, I think that really keeps you kind of on target, like you say, being able um, to achieve that harmony.
Exactly. And I look at it like this because sometimes, here boundaries can be difficult, right? We feel bad saying no, or we're afraid we're gonna, even if it personal, career wise, miss out on something. But I look at boundaries as limits liberate you. If I have boundaries or rules in place, these limits, then I'm going to end up with a freedom to live the life I want. If I don't have any boundaries in place, things are just going to happen to me as opposed to me making them happen in a thoughtful way. And so I think when you think, if you want to have, that harmony or kind of that, different designation between all your life domains, you've got to make sure you've got some boundaries in place. And I always tell people, if somebody asks you to do something, a lot of times we know right away, right in our guts, if this is actually something we want to do. If we get excited about it, maybe that's a yes. If we're like dreading it, it's probably a no. And also to think, if somebody, this comes up a lot when I work with like lawyers and other professionals, especially if you're trying to build your careers or your business. You might get these really cool opportunities, but it might not be the right time for some of them. And so to really take a minute to just be thoughtful about it. Like, does this work really well with the schedule I want to have, with the current life and position I'm in personally, professionally? Because a no now doesn't necessarily mean a no forever. And you can communicate that to people, as opposed to taking on too much and then all of a sudden you're not doing a great job in any of these areas and you're burning yourself out.
Yeah, you're exhausted, angry at whoever asked you to
Yeah.
do something, and also angry at yourself. And but is there a difference between men and women in these kinds of situations, that women tend to, I know, to say yes when they mean no in those situations, and that men, I know I'm stereotyping, but just generally speaking, men are able to say, you know what, no, I can't do it, or I won't do it.
I think women, it's a lot more emotional to turn something down for a woman, just generally speaking. I was with a group of women last week, and we were actually talking about this. And, because especially too, when it's a personal thing, maybe somebody asks you to, whether it's, hey, can you go out to dinner? And maybe this is like the one night you had free this week. Or somebody asks you, hey, can you join this board or this committee or something? And you don't want to say yes because you just don't have time, or maybe it's something that you don't know that you want to do, and it's somebody you care for asking you, or somebody you admire asking you. And I think that that's where that emotional stuff comes in, and it can be hard to say no. And and I always tell people, take a minute to think about it. And if you're going to say no, you don't owe somebody some huge long explanation, right? You can just
Yeah.
say, you know what, I thank you so much for this opportunity or for asking me to do this. I would love to, but it just doesn't work right now with my schedule.
Yeah, I think that's that's good advice. You don't have to explain
Yeah,
yourself. You don't have to go into a long dissertation about why you're saying no,
exactly.
right? Yeah. So now let's talk about, because I mentioned, I think, several things: time, technology. You kind of touched
Yes.
on, putting down the phones. What else? I mean, because I mean, it's really difficult, not just with cell phones, but with all the information. I find myself now, I have a question. I'm asking AI immediately. I can't kind of stop myself. Like, I want the answer. And so I'm on GPT, that kind of stuff, which is we're going to have access to even
I
more.
know, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I
Yeah.
always tell people to kind of, especially with like the online stuff or the social stuff, just to monitor how much you do. I mean, and one simple thing I like to tell people, and people really get into this once they do it, it takes a minute. If you're somebody who, when you get up in the morning, don't grab your phone right away. I would challenge people, even if it's just for a half hour, right? Get up and do something that kind of gets you in a good mood or gets you moving a little bit that is not online. Because once we pick up that device, which is like a little mini computer, we have trouble putting it down for the day. So, think, and also even just at work for people, if, I run into a lot where people are like, I get distracted because I'm just constantly answering emails all day. Can you find a time where you're just going to sit down and just answer those emails and then at other times focus on something else? So that's really, again, putting like boundaries around that too.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the other thing is, and we only have a couple minutes left,
Mhm.
I find, and I can usually detect it when you're on, say, talking on the phone, either professionally or to a friend, I can feel that the other person is
Yep.
also on their cell or on their computer. And like, you don't have to do that. I mean, that's one way of, if I'm on a phone call, I'm on a phone call, right?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Just spending and really just focusing on that one thing at a time and then moving on to something else.
Yeah, one thing at a time, boundaries. Don't get distracted.
Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, it seems like, if we're following all of this advice and this approach, we'd be in pretty good shape.
Yeah, I mean, and like I say, and I talk about this in my book, it takes time. Just like if you were running a marathon, everything's not gonna just work perfectly right away. You have to kind of, practice these things like boundary setting. That could take a long time to practice till you get it where you want it to be, and that's okay. It's just that idea of, adding in small things and moving forward.
Yep. Great advice and lots of good information in our conversation, but also in the book. So, Erin, give us website platforms to go to for more information.
Yeah, so you can find me on my website at erincliffordwellness.com. I'm also on Instagram at Erin Wellness and Facebook and LinkedIn. And my book is available at Amazon and all major retailers.
Great. Thanks so much for being on the show today.
Oh,
Lots of,
thanks for
yeah,
having
good
me.
conversation. Thank you. Joining me today is author Robyn Koslowitz, PhD. The title of her book is Post Traumatic Parenting: Break the Cycle and Become the Parent You Always Wanted to Be. Every good parent wants to create relationships with their children that are filled with joy, connection, and healthy attachment. Yet, well meaning but traumatized parents, those who suffered as children or who are dealing with traumatic events as adults, tend to see the world from a survival point of view. If that's you, you might suspect that your own trauma is negatively influencing your parenting behaviors. Where can you turn for support and wisdom? Well, renowned traumatic parenting expert who's on the show today, workshop leader, speaker, and founder of the Center for Psychological Growth, child psychologist Dr. Robyn Koslowitz, directly explains exactly how every post traumatic parent can reverse the damage from their own traumas and forge a strong, healthy relationship with their children. She's appeared on Fox, CNN, NewsNation, and other national television outlets. Welcome to the show, Robyn. Nice to have you on.
Thanks so much for having me. I really love talking about this topic. It's super important right now.
Yeah, it's critical. And unfortunately, it seems that many people have had very traumatic uh, uh, events in their lives that does affect their children. I guess my first question is like, how do they become aware initially, like that the way I was raised or what's happened to me is really affecting as I say, in a negative way in the way I do parenting.
Yeah, I think it's one word, and that word is disproportionate. Whenever we're disproportionate with our kids, when a parent comes and says, I don't know why I yell at my kids all the time, or my kids are trying to play with me and I'm just spaced out, I just can't even engage, or, you know, I am trying to parent well and then I just snap and I lose it. I always say it's not you, it's your trauma, right? There was a moment in your life that you learned how to do that, that you learned how to people please. So when someone's stressed out, someone's upset, you right away give them a yes. You know, you meant to hold firm and you meant to tell your middle school kid no when she kept, begging and whining for something she doesn't need. And then you found yourself saying yes. You woke up in the morning meaning to be calm with your kids, and then you found yourself yelling, right? All of those things, there's so much shame involved in that. It feels so terrible, but you learned that somewhere. Where did you learn that? Likely in a moment of trauma. So it's either trauma from your childhood that developed the sort of operating principle of how you react, or it's recent trauma in your life that has left you so depleted that you just don't have psychological energy left to parent. But if you could understand that this is not you and a moral failing, that you're the worst parent in the world, but likely a trauma response, it's very counter shaming.
All right. So then what do you do? Okay, you become aware of that. You realize that. Does this mean long-term therapy or long-term counseling?
So sometimes certainly therapy can be helpful, but sometimes it's a matter of healing ourselves. You know, your inner child can't parent a child. And a lot of times when you yell at your kids, you sound like a much younger version of yourself, right? You always do that. It's not fair. That sounds like a kid speaking, right?
Right, right.
At the same token, in raising your real world children, you can actually heal your inner child. And this is verified by research. We're very neuroplastic. Our brain is ready to reorganize itself while we're parenting. So it's a matter of, number one, recognizing that default and then making a mindful plan what you're going to do instead. So for example, if I feel myself getting stressed out, I'm going to sing instead of speaking my instructions. Very hard to yell when you're singing, right? If I feel myself dissociating while I'm around my kids, I'm going to shut my phone off because my phone is a dissociation machine. That's what it exists to do. I'm going to put it in a box, like literally plug it in and put it in a drawer, and I'm going to focus on my kids. If I find myself people pleasing and saying yes all the time, I'm going to rehearse how I'm going to respond to my child in that moment. Maybe I'm going to prepare them in advance. We're going to the mall today. This is the amount of money we're going to spend, that kind of thing. So the idea is mindfully reprogramming those responses without feeling like the worst person in the world.
Yeah, I like that preparation. That's such a simple thing. We are going to the mall or we're going to somebody's house, and you have a certain expectation is what's going to happen, and you share that with your kid.
Yeah.
And yeah, so there aren't so many surprises. Actually, I was going to ask you, like, y- parents and children behave differently in public than they do at home. In terms of sometimes or how they respond to something, let's say your child's doing that you disapprove of. At home, there seems to be perhaps more of a free reign. You get in public, not so much. How do you handle?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of parents do feel that social pressure to perform parenting in public, and that can be confusing for our kids, especially if we're different at home. But I think that the idea of being ourselves authentically wherever we are. And like you said before, preparing our kids when we're going to be in public. And some of that is also, when we feel very on show in public, a lot of times that's also a trauma response, right? Like people
Yeah.
are judging me. That sounds like a teenager, right? That's an earlier version of self. So this idea that people are probably not judging you, first of all, and if they are judging you, okay, let them, give them permission to, they're allowed. But this idea that ultimately I want to parent in accordance with my values, not in accordance with social media's values, not in accordance with even like I'm a parenting expert. You don't have to parent in accordance with my values. You have to parent in accordance with your values. And that means you have to figure out what your values are.
This brings me to the next question because I was thinking about this before we got on the air. You have two, let's say you have two parents, two partners who are parenting, and they come from very different places. One may have had been traumatized or is being traumatized, and the other isn't. So they have different ways of approaching parenting. How does that work?
So, first of all, communication and clarity. And a lot of parents don't realize that you have to have the parenting values conversation with your parenting partner because sometimes our assumptions about parenting, we don't even know that they're assumptions. I was recently working with a family where the father thought that the only way you discipline kids is spanking and there's just no other way. So, when his wife was saying, I would really like to not spank the kids, he thought that meant I would like to never tell them how to behave. It didn't occur to him that there are other approaches where you still teach children how to behave that don't include spanking. So sometimes if you haven't had a conversation about your parenting values, you don't even realize that you have certain assumptions. Is dinner something that the whole family sits down around a table and eats and has a conversation about their day? Or is it something where everybody grabs food and, zones out wherever they zone out in front of the TV in another room? You might not even know that you and a parenting partner have completely different assumptions about what the word dinner means or what screen time limits means. One person might think that means 20 minutes a day. One person thinks that means 2 hours a day. So you're never going to know that kind of until you're parenting and you make an assumption and your spouse is saying like, what? That's not how you parent,
Yeah,
right? So that
that's really
conversation.
that is I think that's key because you hear people talking or you hear parents talking about quality time. Well, what does that mean? Well, quality, could mean
Right.
a lot of different things, right? For each parent and each kid, and of course, and each one of your children is different too. So, what happens when you have, well, let's say going out and you go out in public, you go out for dinner, you've got three kids. One always seems to be able to handle the situation. The other one never handles it well. And, the third one's something else. That which creates a different set of responses from the parents.
Right. And I think, again, that goes with preparation. And sometimes it's about understanding that certain temperaments do very well in certain situations and others don't. And in the book I talk about temperament and how to understand your kid's temperament and how to plan for it. If you have a kid who doesn't sit well for long periods of time, maybe that French restaurant is not the place to go,
I've
right?
seen so many kids in that French restaurant, probably mine included. But anyway, go on.
Yeah, and you know what? What you do then is you say, this kid's not cut out for this. So either I'm going to create a plan where I call it stretching the rubber band, where slowly but surely I'm going to stretch this kid. We're going to sit progressively for longer periods of time. We're going to learn it as a skill, whether it's waiting appropriately in a dentist's office, whether it's quiet voices in the library, whatever it is, there's a skill that I likely have to teach my kids. The opposite of a rubber band is a pretzel. There are a lot of parents who think that being a responsive, kind parent means sort of twisting yourself into a pretzel to accommodate your child. My kid's sensory, he shouldn't have to wear shoes, kind of thing. My kid needs to move a lot, so he shouldn't ever have to sit still in class. Well, we might start that way with giving him a lot of movement breaks, but the goal would be to gently stretch the rubber band and teach him how to handle it. The goal is not that you should be carrying a second grader around everywhere because they're too sensory to wear shoes, right? The idea would be, how do we teach them how to wear shoes? Maybe we have to find a more comfortable type of shoes. Sure. But at the same token, how do we progressively stretch you so that you can handle the demands of the world?
Yeah. And just to add to that, and don't put children in positions that you know that they can't handle and then get frustrated and angry. And
Yeah.
yeah. And I think that's difficult, but yeah.
If you pull a rubber band too fast, it snaps, right? You don't
Yeah.
ever want to snap the rubber band.
So what do you do with, let's say, and I go back to the 3 kids, maybe because I have 3 kids and 3 grandchildren, 4 actually.
Wow.
And you want to go to certain places, and maybe you know that one kid can't, it's very difficult for them to handle it. Do you go with do you, what's the common denominator? Do stuff with that the older kids can do or that the younger kids can do? How do you sort of manage that, this family?
So I think there's a
Yeah.
little bit too much emphasis placed on consistency in parenting. This idea that both parents have to be on the same page at all times. If we're dealing with a traditional family structure or there's 2 parents or parenting partners, there's nothing wrong with a parent on duty system where the rules are different. Grandma babysits you guys during the week, and when she gives you supper, you eat it in front of the TV. When I'm here, we eat around the table as a family. When Dad's here, we do something else. Nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with saying there are certain outings that are really ideal for the older kids, and we're going to leave the younger kids home. Fear does not mean that everybody gets the same thing. Fear means that everybody gets what they need. So sometimes it's a matter of saying, you know what? He's a real science geek. He just loves science museums, but the little kids are not going to handle it. So you know what? I'm into science too. I'm going to take them. Dad, you take the little kids to the playground outside, and we split up that way. We overvalue doing everything as a family. Now, there are things we can do as a family, but I think when we're doing something as a family, we should accommodate the rubber band that's the tightest and the smallest, the one that has the least stretch in it. So, yeah, let's not go to the art museum with a screaming toddler. Let's go to the children's museum and, the older kids can understand that this is about a family outing where we accommodate the youngest ones, but maybe we go to the art museum with the older kids who can appreciate that.
So we don't have to be this undifferentiated ego mass, I guess. I don't know if that's
Exactly.
yeah. And I think it's difficult sometimes for young parents to be able to do that, that they think everything has to be done together. And of course, there's situations where the parents are both working and they have limited time together. So that has to be figured out too, because there has to be some kind of a balance. That,
Yeah, and
you
I
don't,
feel like
yeah.
with working parents, there's so much information now on social media that's done through this lens of, if you don't, there are certain corners of the internet where if you don't co-sleep and baby wear till your kid is 4, then you are harming attachment. Like that's it, your kid's messed up forever.
Yeah.
And I think that that's so unfair. First of all, there are a lot of families where there are 2 working parents and they can barely make ends meet as it is. If you're co-sleeping and that means you don't get sleep and that means that the morning doesn't go very well and you're yelling at your kids and then you're feeling guilt and shame and then at night you can't even come back to yourself, then that's going to harm attachment a lot more. Maybe you say, you know what, co-sleeping is lovely for somebody who homeschools on a farm. It doesn't work for me. So I'm going to come up with another plan and another way to make my kid feel supported and loved and attached and attuned to during the night that doesn't include them sleeping in my bed, right? Just because the internet says that something is the worst thing ever doesn't mean it is. I once saw a post on social media that said that if you use sticker charts, you're a coercive and abusive parent. Like, really?
Yeah.
You
And,
can
and
use
that,
sticker charts.
yeah.
It's okay.
That's a good example. But I think, and what you're saying is, I think really, I don't know if this is true. Some, people begin parenting usually older now, 30, something, even in the 40s. And they do want, they feel that there are these rules. Everybody, you have to do this, or like you say, your kid's finished for life. But um, is, as a therapist, I mean, is that one of the things I'm assuming that you really guide parents through, that there are lots of different ways to parent and your kid will turn out okay? And that there isn't just one way? Because I think some of the social media and the internet really is adds to the fact that you've got to do it a certain way and this is the way to do it. And
Yeah.
parents themselves don't aren't confident in their own intuition. I don't know if you experience, I'm sure you do, when you're
Very
counseling.
much so.
Yeah.
Yeah, parents are, they really lack a sense of discernment. And it makes sense, right? You have a whole to-do list when you're parenting, but when you've had parenting experiences in your childhood or you're depleted from trauma, you have this whole to-don't list, right? Like, don't yell at my kids, don't do this, don't do that. And that makes it very hard. In the book, I talk about if you really boil it down, parenting is two things. It's a seesaw that you want to keep balanced between responsive and responsible. And you can do both. Responsive is all those gentle parenting practices, teaching kids about their big emotions, validating them, talking to them gently and respectfully and kindly. And that's not a contradiction to responsible. We do need to teach our children how to navigate the demands of the world. And you can do both. It's not an either or. You can have some rules, right, that make
Yeah.
sense while also being kind about them. So I can be validating all day long when my kid doesn't want to wear their shoes or when they don't want to brush their teeth or they don't want to do their homework, right? I can validate, yeah, it's so frustrating to come home from school and have this pile of homework. Yeah, it's really annoying, right? My daughter recently was upset because there was a deep water test in her pool and you have to jump in and then you have to tread water and then you have to swim and she doesn't like to jump in. So I can validate like, yeah, that's hard for you. You don't like that feeling of jumping into the pool. I get that. That's so frustrating. And all your friends are deep water swimmers already, and you really want to swim with them. And then on the other hand, responsible. I'm not calling the head lifeguard to say, hey, accommodate my kid and don't, make her jump in because that's a safety thing. So let's make a plan. How can you learn how to jump in so that you can pass the deep water test and you can swim in the deep with your friends? And that sense of accomplishment my daughter had when she came home from day camp and said, Mommy, I did it. I passed the deep water test. That's a capacity she's going to have for life, right?
Yeah.
She is now a brave, courageous person who sort of beat a monster, right?
Yeah.
She slayed the dragon of the deep water,
She's going
right?
to go out and take the big risks now. You better be
Yeah,
careful, right?
right.
Yeah, no, I mean that is important. And you do see a lot of parents, um, I'm always kind of observing, like always trying to accommodate their kid in a public situation where well, here's an example, going to kids' recitals, which I go, grandchildren's recitals, et cetera,
Sure.
and the mom or the parent, whoever, brings a baby who shouldn't be in that situation, screaming and crying, and ruins the whole or recital for everyone else.
Right.
Okay, there's a lot of that. Now, where does that come from? That's
I
selfish,
feel
is it?
I feel like it's hard sometimes for parents to manage competing needs, and we have to understand that sometimes, practically speaking, who's watching your baby, or sometimes your baby naps well in the stroller, and today they happen to have an ear infection. But I think there's that common sense of I'm going to have to step out. Someone else will have to video it just while I calm the baby. I think it's even more so with toddlers. Like there was recently a TikTok where a woman was at a restaurant with her friends, and she got a birthday cupcake with a candle, and a mom of a toddler walked over and said, oh, my son loves blowing out candles. Can he blow out your candles?
Mm,
And was very offended when the birthday woman said no. And this idea that that mom had this opportunity to say to her kid, yeah, you really wish you could blow out the candle. It's so exciting to see a candle, but it's not your turn. She's the birthday girl. When it's your turn and it's your birthday, you get to blow out the candles. Or even, you know what? We have some candles at home. When we get home, we can have a fun time blowing out the candles. Right now, it's not your turn, right? The mom, in trying to almost like people please her 4-year-old and she probably thought she was parenting well. I don't want my kid to experience any distress at all. Sometimes kids have to experience a little bit of predictable distress that's supported by us. Oh, you're so frustrated. You wanted to push the button in the elevator and that other girl got there first and she pushed the button. That you're very sad about that. Sometimes we don't like demand that we cancel the elevator ride and let our child push the button. We learn to navigate the disappointment. It's not that if your child is distressed, it's all over. Because maybe when you were traumatized, you were alone with your trauma, but you forget your kid isn't you. Your kid has you. And you are the parent who can sit and help them understand that. Yeah, it's uncomfortable to wait our turn, and we're going to wait our turn. That's not bad. Even if the kid's having a meltdown and they're screaming in public and they're causing a scene. Okay, so we tactfully walk out of the restaurant and we calm down. That's
yeah.
okay.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you just, as you said, it's the context. Like maybe the parent was in a traumatic situation when this was happening, and it's a different experience. But it's to say no and to do this, like as you're talking about with the candle example. If you've got a parent who's not hasn't been traumatized and is comfortable doing it, and then it's okay. It's different. It's a very different
Yeah.
situation. Yeah.
Likely the trauma app in that parent's brain was screaming, my kid is in distress. This is an emergency. I need to fix this. I need to make my kid calm again. And it was their trauma parenting their child because, like you said, a parent who hasn't been traumatized would be like, yeah, 3-year-olds are going to be disappointed if they can't blow out the candles sometimes.
Yeah.
And they'll survive. It will be okay.
I think this is a huge issue, though, this idea of not wanting to disappoint your child, don't not wanting them to have stress. I think in this particular generation, um, and they need to be able to do that and help kids to tolerate it, because when you get out in the real world, there's a lot of stress that they have to deal with. So this is kind of the precursor to it, right? But there's that
Yeah,
thing of always wanting to placate your kid, or always getting involved if something's going wrong. Let them handle it. I mean, if
yeah.
it's appropriate. Yeah.
There's a concept of eustress, right? Good stress that we feel like maybe during a workout or, when we're like, right now, if I'm speaking with you and I'm excited to talk about this, there's a little bit of that adrenaline that gives me spark. We have to teach our children to notice that response and be okay with it because that is good stress, right? So we never want to be that pretzel. We just want to be that rubber band, and we want to do that R2 parenting of like, yeah, I can validate you. And also I really want you to navigate the demands of the world. And that's okay, because you're right. I think social media does make it seem like if our children are experiencing distress, we've done something wrong as a parent. But that really is not a great way to raise future adults.
Yeah. And one of the things, and this happened with one of my grandsons at a baseball game, and he won this trophy, and he's telling me all about it, and I'm thinking how exciting. And but then uh, the next thing that he had to say was that, well, everybody got a trophy. So then I'm thinking, well, then I didn't say this, but you know, this whole idea that everybody has to get a trophy and nobody can be a
Yeah.
winner, that I
Yeah,
don't, yeah,
I think that really has fallen apart. Like that self-esteem, parenting of the 80s and that idea that like everyone gets a participation award,
yeah,
it really fell apart. We saw that it didn't do much for mental health. But the idea that you might not win and that's okay. And there are so many picture books. And in the book I talk about in the R2 parenting approach, use a picture book to help your child learn to navigate that stressful feeling of, oh, I lost, and that's a yucky feeling. There are ways of borrowing from other humans' experiences to help our children navigate. And it's okay if you don't know how to do that because maybe no one taught you, maybe no one modeled it for you. When I was starting this research, I was giving a parenting class in a hospital, and a mom raised her hand and she said, you talk about normative childhood experiences. My childhood was spent like I was on a boat from another country, and then I came here and I was basically enslaved by my uncle in his dry cleaning business. So I didn't have a normal childhood like what you see on a sitcom. So I don't know what's normal for my kid,
yeah,
right? So then the
yeah.
idea is, okay, so learn it. That's why I wrote the book. If you don't know, you can learn. Parenting's a skill, and any skill can be learned.
Yeah. Parenting is a skill. That's well said. And you're not expected to know it all, right? I mean, you don't
Yeah.
just, yeah. I mean, I think that's very true. So, that's an interesting response. What other responses have you gotten from your book? Because there's just so much information in here that is, I think, really important for parents or people who are doing the parenting.
There are so many people who say, I thought it was just me, right? I thought I was the only person who was experiencing this, sensation of like, I am parenting so depleted and I don't know how. And this book just undoes that loneliness because people find themselves in it. And then because we talk about first the impact of trauma on parenting, the types of post-traumatic parents where they can find themselves, and then finally what to do about it. And I really boil it down to the R2 parenting practices. Those parents are really able to undo that sense of isolation and shame. Shame stands for, I have a bumper sticker that says shame stands for should have already mastered everything. It's a skill. You didn't master it yet, so you can learn it.
Yeah. And it's a life skill. I mean, yeah, it's
Yeah.
definitely, yeah, absolutely. We only have a couple of minutes left, so give us some more information about where we can get the book. It's a must read, and then more information about what you do and your work.
So the book is available now wherever you get your books, and you can certainly find it on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, your local independent bookstore. You can find me at posttraumaticparenting.com. The post-traumatic parenting community tends to hang out on Instagram at Dr. Koslowitz Psychology. And we really are very responsive, and I answer DMs and I respond to comments all the time. There's also a post-traumatic parenting YouTube channel and a post-traumatic parenting podcast where I speak to experts, where I give you like a specific toy or tool or skill to help your kid with like anxiety or, bedtime fears or the morning struggle, whatever you need help with. So, and all of those are built by the post-traumatic parenting community, because this is really a book that's about the post-traumatic parenting community. I never want another mom to feel as overwhelmed and afraid to parent as I felt 26 years ago when I got pregnant for the first time. I just never want another mom to feel that way. So my goal is to undo that sense of isolation and make parenting accessible to everybody, and really helping parents understand that while your inner child can't raise a child, in raising your real world child, you can heal your inner child.
Professional and personal. Post-traumatic parenting. Break the cycle and become the parent you always wanted to be. Thanks so much, Robyn Koslowitz, PhD, for being on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me and
Yeah.
giving me the opportunity.